the grounds of the Exmoor Country Club, walking to a known Potawatomi village. And there's another photo where they're actually leaning over the trail tree, looking at a map together about the 13 trees they were going to visit in 1941. So the federal survey, just so you know, 1838, Halsey mentions the professor from Lake Forest in history wrote the 700-page book on the history of Lake County. They directly mention the trail marker trees being off the Green Bay Trail. This isn't conjecture, this isn't my mommy told me. These are facts that took a lifetime to piece together. It was very intriguing, very interesting. Again, this is a different survey. I respect people that have earned their degrees and their rights to say what they're trying to convey. So the surveyor in 1852, and this happened to wind up 28 years after I started. This tree was 3 miles from my house, marking the land passage underwater between two lakes. You put one on one side, you put another on the other side. If you keep one in your rear view and one ahead of you, you'll walk in the proper water that's rock hard bottom. Over here it's 25 feet deep, over here it's 15 feet deep. Again, that was a form of use of the trail trees. And to have the surveyor draw a trail marker tree, I mean, again, it took a long time to find this stuff. I just was ecstatic. I was at the Cook County, Lake County plat, survey plat, going through plats after plats. So they were important men recording important things. And all it took was the rediscovery of it and bringing it back into the light. All right, we're all familiar with quotes, and we all know that if there's a quote, that sticks, it really has to be meaningful somehow beyond the pale. So when a quote is put in a book that's the annals of a state and is in the 1800s, and what they're actually referring to, if you take the time to read this, they are comparing the shaping of a trail marker tree, a young oak when it's young, to the shaping of our children. If they are properly groomed and shaped when they are young, it goes on to continue to serve the community and people into the future. That is a pretty powerful quote. And to be a quote, the people in Iowa have vast knowledge of the trail marker trees. It's, again, a large portion of the book. I think there's probably a military guy or two in here. Fort Sheridan, the earliest forts outside of Fort Dearborn and Fort Waukegan. These men, I researched the lives of these officers. These were actual cavalry officers, men that fought, men that traveled, men that had scouts. They learned directly from the scouts what the trees meant. It would benefit them as much as it would benefit the Indians then. They know the shortcuts, they know where to cross the rivers. And these things were protected to the point where this young one, this is shaped in the 1800s, went on to live for another century almost. But they kept that tree out of all the trees they cleared for the base. They knew exactly what they were doing. And that was due to there was a historian I was talking to here earlier. Without a historian that followed my work for at least 30 years, was at a conference of slides they were doing at Fort Sheridan when it was converted to residential properties. And when the slide came up, she said, just yelled, "Stop!" And she analyzed the photograph, got a hold of me. So it's not just me, it's all the people I came in contact with and that were kind enough to pay attention. And all those little bits and pieces from all over the country. So to have the officers, next to the trail marker tree, that's pretty impressive. And then know the explanation. three distinct trails were still here in Illinois in the early 1900s. Another famous historian, Frank Grover, head of the Evanston Historical Society, documented three trails. Not only were they trails, each trail was a different species. One red oak, one white oak, one elm. They led to different things. One led around the famous Skokie. I'm sure you've heard the word Skokie, referred to as a village or a town. What that really means is marsh. There was a gigantic marsh before they converted it into the lagoons that people know today. Harold Ickes, the Secretary of Interior, made that a life project. But before that, you had to navigate that swamp. It was about 7 miles. You didn't want to get into the mire. Illinois was a pit. Some described it as a pit of vicious vipers, swamps, vines, and hideous insects. Don't never take the time to go there. It was that bad before the drainage systems, for real. So again, this tree is based on that actual tree. This tree was the late 1800s. You can see in the back the size of the trees, just for those that are skeptical. The man in that photo on the right was my inspiration. And to have him as a young man standing next to the tree I got to see in the 60s before it went down was really nice. And, you know, Richard Glody did the Indian Boundary Park concept and design. That meant the border between the wilderness and Chicago. And he was a trail tree advocate because the man was a landscape architect and a true outdoorsman and worked with Native Americans once again, hand in hand. He knew firsthand. He documented over 100 trees in Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and Iowa before he passed away in 41. Are there any landscape architects in the crowd or people that know of any? Jensen is one of the most famous landscape architects in the Midwest. He actually gave the first formal speech at the Blackstone Hotel in 1911. Strictly, he was a superintendent of forests, superintendent of parks, had an illustrious career, designed the Ford mansions later, on and on and on and on. He knew exactly what the trail trees were, gave the first formal lecture at the behalf or request of the DAR and the American Indian Committee.
The DAR were so important to the Native Americans, and this is a quote from them of the 21st Congress in 1912. The history of the Indian trail trees of the North Shore of Chicago has been known and handed down to the 3 generations of early and present American white residents of Chicago and suburbs, from the Indians themselves, who lived around here until 1836 in large numbers, and when they immigrated west of the Mississippi, a few stayed here for 20 years or more. So the location and purpose of these Indian trail marker trees is as much a part of our local history as Fort Dearborn or any other landmark.
And that's them saying it. So this is not new. It's only new to people of today. And to give you another idea, this is, I think I'm talking about Frank Grover somewhere here. No? Okay. Anyway, again, another tree, yeah, Frank Grover at the top from the Historical Society. This tree was a triple trunk. They were single, directional usually, double, a location of a specific thing, and triples were encampments. It didn't mean you were at the village. It meant you were getting near home. And this is documented in several tribes. Again, it took a long time. The Comanches just recognized another one in Holiday Park in Texas. with a proclamation verifying the same thing. When this had to be moved, the people in the Evanston area weren't happy. They cut the tree down to a sizable management, petrified it, and put it up on pedestals with a plaque, and it, again, served to educate people for another 20 years. Yeah, okay. You can go on. And again, if you don't think these things were significant, pretty sure most of you are familiar with Winnetka, Wilmette, Blanco, the North Shore on Lake Michigan. They superimposed their 75th anniversary map in 1947 over the trail marker trees, if you could see them, top right, top, both of those, over to the right by the ship. I actually was, I'm not that old, I'm a pup, I'm 72. But I got to see 3 of those trees while they were still alive. Where we grew up, you were taken by your mother, usually, or Cub Scouts or the Boy Scouts, and they took the time to take you to the existing trees, teach you what they meant. And again, this isn't fly-by-night. The town seal for that village is the trail marker tree. This was a real blessing. Obviously, some people knew about this event. It was actually the largest event held by the Native American Committee and the DAR ever at the time, period. Over 100 people, scouts, historians, ethnologists, researchers, all attended. 2 members of the Ho-Chunk, 1 member, Chief Evergreen, who was an incredibly respected orator. They claim he knew more about the Native Americans in the wild than the eagles in the sky than the wolves in the forest. And that was a quote by Judge Woods of Springfield, not me. Just an incredibly respected man. He was housed by the DAR and the Secretary of Interior, Errol Lickies. They treated him like royalty, they stayed with him, they did the blessing. But this photograph, again, came from the result of the book. I was in Canada working on a major project, and my assistant said, "Dennis, there's an auction, and it's the family of the Glodies. They're auctioning off all of his slides and things from like 1910 to 1940. I said, "You bid on those slides and you don't stop bidding until they're in the studio." We went through them, it was countless roses and bushes, landscape projects, on and on and on, and then bingo. These are glass. These are extremely cool decks. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the actual photograph taken of the meeting. The next one was Chief Evergreen standing and blessing the trail tree with a bundle of tobacco and a bundle of arrows, giving the tree a name. Again, this was one of the photos to the right, another one to the left. That was the plaque. So when you have concrete evidence that it's the natives, not Dennis Downs saying this, that it's the natives, not past historians saying this, that's impactful. That should be recognized. And again, not every bent tree is a trail marker tree. That is an insult and a travesty. It would only cause mass confusion. They copied a natural phenomena, altered it, so it became part of their culture. Zion, extremely close to your border. The Potawatomi were involved heavily in this. I worked with Kenona Zoe, the Potawatomi historical expert for the Prairie Band, learned about the tree. They not only saved it, had ceremonies, had plaques, involved the Indians. In the actual survey now of that property, partly because of what I've done, the lawyers have incorporated that nobody can touch the 25 feet surrounding the existing trail marker tree, which is pretty cool. Again, photo on the left, that came to me directly from the Pontiac's living relatives family. That is the doctor, Dr. Raymond Jansen. Literally looking at the map where they went to 13 other trees. On the right is the same tree from a different angle. I looked for decades for that tree. I could not find it. I didn't realize the size of the lots had been greatly reduced in the richer areas of our country. So when I was looking for it, the street didn't even exist. It wasn't where it actually is. It doesn't exist on the old maps. I gave speeches in Highland Park, Illinois, which had a history of the trail trees. The head of the historical department, Rob Roddering, paid attention, attended, got a book, infected his children with the knowledge. His kids on bicycles went down every street in Highland Park. They actually relocated the tree, contacted me. I don't let the public know where it's at, but I figured out why I hadn't found it. It was just what they'd done subdivision-wise and road-wise. I didn't tell Hilda it still existed. I said, I'm gonna introduce you to the mayor of Antioch. I just had a major event on Main Street with the Bronze. And I said, dress up a little. You know, I want you to meet some of the people that have helped your people and form better relationships. So she did. She got all dressed up, and I took her to this tree, not to the Bronze. And she's walking up, and she just starts crying. And I put her where her dad stood, and I stood where Dr. Jansen did. And I can't tell you how moved the woman was.